And get started. Beth, I'm not sure how many we're expecting, but if this looks like a good number, we can go ahead and kick things off. I don't want to keep people waiting. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening. For those that don't know, I'm Andrea Wilkins. I'm the legislative liaison with the State League, and I, alongside Linda Hutchinson and Kathy Ebersberger, lead up the LAC. They are our co-chairs of Action and Advocacy, and I could not do this job without them. The LAC, as many of the members on the call here know, does a lot of work. We've got some really broad coverage, and that's wonderful because, that's our impact as an organization. A lot of the work is very public facing and really gets the message out for what we stand on and what we think should be happening with policy development in Colorado. So we love that broad impact and are thankful to see our so many of our LAC members here tonight. And as in addition to that, some non-LAC members who hopefully will get a good sense of what we've been working on the past several months and some of the things that the General Assembly has been really focused on. Kathy, I think you've got the slides, so if you wouldn't mind advancing us maybe to the next one here. Oh, I
Okay.
think one back.
No, that was me.
Oh, yeah. Could we do the previous slide? Oh,
Sorry.
no problem.
This one?
Yeah, we've just got some contextual information here. The session actually hasn't been over for all that long. It actually just wrapped up on May 13th, and there were over 700 bills. Well, not just bills, but bills, resolutions, and memorials that were considered by the LAC. And all right, by the General Assembly. Oh my gosh, the LAC does so much work. I can't even imagine if we were covering all of the bills. But the General Assembly is, typically, looking at and considering, somewhere between the 600 and 700 range. And they definitely fell out on kind of the high side of that this year with, I believe, around 714. So a lot of legislation is being considered. Um, but fortunately, we only follow things that align with our position and things that we really consider, an organizational priority. So this year we followed 157 bills. And we had about 40 citizen lobbyists on the Legislative Action Committee team as a whole, which is, I believe, also a high point, at least during my time with the league. So when I say that our coverage is really broad, part of that is the fact that we have more members and we can go deeper into our policy analysis and our lobbying efforts. And we can also go broader in terms of our coverage and, really look at a range of bills that impact the LWVCO positions. Now that things have wrapped up and the session has officially adjourned, the governor has 30 days following that May 13th adjournment to either sign bills into law, he can allow them to, become law without a signature or veto them. So at this point, it's really more the veto that I think people are kind of watching out for to see what may happen there. Let's see here. And yeah, I think we're good on that one. If we could go to the next slide. One thing I do want to mention, and I'm sure everyone's really well aware, because there's just been so much talk about it, but it's really impossible to talk about the legislative session this year without thinking about it in terms of the budget shortfall that policymakers were facing. The session started with lawmakers facing a 1.5 billion dollar budget shortfall, which really just heavily impacted any policy decision that was made. Obviously, this made it extremely difficult to figure out what was going to get cut. With that level of cuts that were being made, some really difficult decisions had to be made, unfortunately, and some real challenges in figuring out how the state was going to maintain our critical programs and infrastructure that we need to function as a state, all while balancing the budget. So a really challenging budget situation. This meant that there really wasn't much ability at all to consider new programs or services that would require an appropriation. So the practical reality of that is that anything that had a substantial fiscal note really wasn't going anywhere. So there were a lot of bills that may have been creating good policy or good programs, but the state just couldn't fund. So a lot of time was spent by prime sponsors figuring out how to get those fiscal notes down and see if they could still come out of it with a viable program. But just really difficult budget situation. And the bad news is that I think this situation is expected to continue, absent some sort of structural change in the way Colorado handles our budget. So, unfortunately, I don't think this year is unique, but it's important context in thinking about, how policy was developed this session. So let's go on to the next slide. Okay, so I mentioned that the LAC followed 150 bills this session, and of those, we supported 109. So, we always kind of try and pay attention to, how many bills were decided in accordance with the stance that we assigned. So, in the case of bills that we're supporting, obviously we're looking for those bills to pass, and we're really pleased that of that 109, all but 19 ended up passing. So that's something that's we consider to be a really good outcome. We think a lot of good legislation came within that batch. Conversely, we did oppose 22 bills. So in this instance, what we're looking for is for the bills to not advance or to get postponed indefinitely, which is the legislative term for, essentially saying that the bill has been killed. And again, we were pleased with where things landed here. Of the 22, 20 of them were postponed indefinitely. So, sometimes the bills that you prevent from becoming law, are as important or sometimes even much more important than, seeing something that you're supporting pass. We see a lot of bad legislation that is, really antithetical to our positions as an organization. And so, we're always really pleased when we can be part of the opposition that prevents those bills from taking effect. And we saw that happen in a lot of cases this year. And then if you're curious about, just the big picture for all of the bills that LAC followed, because, if you add the 22 and the 109 up, you'll notice that does not equate to 157. And that's because there's a lot of bills that we're monitoring. We're keeping eyes on them and we want people to know that. But for whatever reason, we decide that we don't think a different stance is appropriate. So we leave things in a monitor category. And then in some specific cases, we're asking for amendments. And that's what I want to touch on in this slide here. So there were 5 bills this session where we took an amend stance, which means that we were also communicating with the bill sponsors to see if we could push through some changes that we thought were either needed for us to really get on board with the bill, or in some instances, just make it less bad. So the first one I want to touch on fell in the voting and elections realm. House Bill 1203 was dealing with the modification of county commissioner elections. And in most of these cases, we're talking about broad bills, but there's oftentimes a specific piece of it that we either think is missing and should be added or is objectionable, and we want that to get taken away. And so we make those really specific suggestions as what we think that might be. And the specific piece that we were really excited about in 1203 is that the bill, as introduced, presented a path forward for proportional representation in county commissioner elections. And of course, LWV US supports electoral systems that proportionally reflect the people they represent. So this was a concept that we could really get behind, and we were supportive of the bill. Unfortunately, later amendments stripped this language from the bill, and really kind of took it to a place where we weren't happy with it. So we changed our position from support to amend. And in this case, we were kind of joking that we were actually wanting to unamend it because it's more that we wanted to return to the original language that was taken out than us coming to the sponsors with language that we thought should be added in. We thought it was in a much better form as introduced. But unfortunately, no progress was made. We were not successful in getting this provision added back in, and the bill was ultimately PI'd, meaning short for postponed indefinitely. So it did not advance. This is something that I think is going to be a big issue for us going forward. We've worked really hard on, electoral reform, but reform in our voting, so we, can have a system that is more reflective of, our population and allows people to express themselves more accurately and truthfully. And I think especially the context that we're living in right now with kind of these redistricting wars that are going on, proportional representation would be a really great thing to see implemented. So we will keep an eye out for any opportunity to either be part of an emerging issue or support efforts as 1203 did that kind of carries us further down the road and, gets us closer on this path. So that's the rationale for the amend stance on 1203. The next bill that we took an amend stance on was 1326, which involved the sunset of the Public Utilities Commission. This bill did pass, and as you can imagine, it was a really broad bill. It was doing all kinds of things to update regulation oversight of utilities, and was, critically reauthorizing the PUC for 11 years. So, we of course saw this bill as very important and very necessary. But and we did support many aspects of the bill, but we did have some issues with it, and one that I want to specifically call out because it fits within, I would say, a larger trend on some of our work that's really kind of focused on transparency. This bill had a provision that we felt was really hindering transparency, and we were concerned about. So LWVCO, along with many partner organizations in the community, had asked that a particular section be struck from the bill. And this provision, if passed, would have allowed commissioners, the Public Utilities Commissioners, to engage in non-public communication under certain circumstances. And, we just really felt that this was an instance where government transparency was being sacrificed for the sake of efficiency. We found that concerning, but we also believed this exception to the public meeting laws to be really unnecessary and potentially setting a dangerous precedent that other public bodies may then start to adopt. And so you start to see the openness of public meetings really start to shut down. So while we did support many provisions of this bill, we had a specific request for amendment, and we are pleased that the stakeholders prevailed in this instance. That provision of the bill was removed, and ultimately the bill was passed. So good success story there. It's always a mixed bag when you're pursuing amendments, and that was the case with two of the housing bills that I also want to touch on. Two of the other amend stances we took were on House Bill 1360, which dealt with affordable housing financing. That bill ultimately passed, and then also House Bill 1401. Transfers from the unclaimed property fund. That bill also passed as well. But the concerns that were happening here, to start with 1360, we knew that some cuts were coming. And the governor had proposed a cut from Proposition 123 from I think a couple of years ago at this point. I have completely lost track of time, but an initiative that we had supported, there was going to be a $110 million proposed cut, um, to the revenue that was coming from that fund for affordable housing. Our housing team was aware of this via, all of the stakeholder meetings they participate in. And while nobody liked this situation, it does kind of come with the territory when you're dealing with, a big budget shortfall as we were this session. But what became especially disturbing is that the team found out about an additional cut that had not been expected amongst the stakeholder community of an additional 20 million that would really compromise money available for affordable housing. The team made a hard push, along with many other stakeholders in the community, to try and get this funding restored to really kind of limit the cuts to that original 110. Unfortunately, that effort was not successful. Again, I think just kind of a reflection of the tough budget situation that we were operating in. Although there were some subsequent efforts via separate legislation that eventually were successful in spreading those cuts out over 3 years. So, hopefully some mitigation of, kind of that impact going on there. And then as far as 1401 is concerned, this bill was another one where, we were pushing for a change that unfortunately did not happen. But essentially, the bill permanently eliminated transfers from the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund that would support housing. That original provision was secured via legislation that we had supported back in 2019. So we really wanted to see this this funding source maintain. But again, despite really strong efforts by the housing team, as well as many other stakeholders in the community, they unfortunately were not able to convince the committee to reject the elimination that happened through this bill. And the bill ultimately was passed. I'll just go ahead there and pause and see if anyone from housing wants to jump in and say anything there. I know that was kind of a lot of behind the scenes information, but just kind of gives you an example of, how in the weeds our citizen lobbyists are, and, how closely they're tracking things to make sure that, legislation is doing what we need it to do. And in cases where we are seeing cuts, that we're doing everything we can to mitigate the impact. Anyone from housing want to jump in there? Okay, I'm not hearing anything, which is totally fine. But if LAC members do have, if I'm touching on the bills that you were leading up this session, and there's anything you want to add, please feel free to just come off mute and jump in. And then the last one that I'll just briefly mention, but Linda will talk about this a little bit more a little bit later in the presentation. One of our additional bills that we took an amend stance was Senate Bill 107. This bill, honestly, much to our surprise, was PI'd. And in this case, having it postponed indefinitely was a good thing. And I'll just leave it at that for now, because, like I said, Linda will get to that in a little more depth in just a bit here. Okay, so just to kind of give, particularly for those that are not members of the LIC, to give a little sense of the context and how we approach all of the topics, all the legislation that covers these, broad range of topics that the General Assembly deals with. Essentially, we are focused on, the legislation that impacts our organizational policies positions in one way or another, for good or bad. Because we do uh, we do follow, the issues that are covered in the program book. You'll see our teams essentially kind of being named after those categories. And they follow those big umbrella areas such as government, um, natural resources, and social policy. So for the teams that fall under the government umbrella, we've got LAC members focusing on elections and voting, members that are focused on the General Assembly as an institution and local government issues, transportation issues, and of course, fiscal and revenue. Our natural resources team really kind of collectively as a team looks at all of the issues in our program book that fall under that larger natural resources umbrella. They're dealing with things like environmental management, land use, air quality, energy, water, and then waste management and hazardous materials. So very broad focus that they've got there. And then last but not least, the social policy category or the social policy umbrella has got a lot of teams that fall underneath that because we've got a lot of policy positions that fall under that umbrella. And these include JEDI, which stands for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, housing, education and higher education, children's issues, healthcare, behavioral health, and reproductive health operate as a team, gun safety, immigration, human trafficking, and a team that focuses on news access and literacy, transparency, and artificial intelligence. So, across the board, we've got our teams that are looking at a lot of legislation. So again, our impact tends to be very broad, which is great. In addition to following and taking stances on various bills and sometimes some resolutions, the LAC also closely evaluates the referred measures and the initiatives, citizens initiatives that we may see on the ballot come this November. So referred measures are measures that are putting a question to the voters on the ballot, but it is being referred or placed there by the General Assembly, assuming that the bill that creates the referred measure or that is the referred measure it actually passes. And I shouldn't say just bill, it can come in the form of a resolution too. But we do try and keep a close eye on these because they have the potential to show up on the ballot and end up being something that ultimately the voters decide. And this session, we track, well, I won't say that we tracked all of them because some of them I think ended up dying pretty early on or maybe didn't align perfectly with our positions. But there were 9 referred measures that were considered this session. Ultimately, only one passed. That was Senate Bill 135, which is intended to generate funding for K through 12 public education. We'll get into that one just a little bit more, but I just wanted to flag it as a measure that is coming or a question that's coming to the ballot via the legislature. And there's also a whole bunch of citizen initiatives, as there typically is in Colorado. And as of right now, 5 citizen initiatives have qualified for the ballot in November. And we have thoroughly analyzed them and taken opposed stances on all of them because they absolutely do not advance any of our positions and are really kind of in opposition to our values and beliefs as an organization. And then there's an additional 16 initiatives that have been approved for circulation so far, but that number is likely to increase. So, we'll consider more as they come along. The LAC does not really formally evaluate and make a recommendation on our official stance until an initiative has qualified for signature gathering. So once that happens, the LAC will review the initiatives. The issue area teams that focus on the area that is covered by the initiative itself will take a really close look at it, make their analysis, and then make a recommendation for a formal stance tied back to our positions, of course. If the topic is aligned. Oftentimes we will see initiatives that just don't deal with subject matter that is covered by our positions. So we don't take a stance in those cases and we don't really involve ourselves in those initiatives. But in cases where they do impact our positions, our teams will make that recommendation for a stance, and then the full LAC will vote. And then their recommendation for a stance will then get passed on to the LWVCO Board of Directors, which will then, after they've had the opportunity to review and vote with the LAC recommendation in mind, they will go ahead and formalize their official stance on the bill, which then becomes, once we've made it through that full process, then we can say we've got an official stance on a ballot initiative. So it is kind of a lengthy process, but we want to make sure that, LAC and the board are on the same page and, having conversations if needed to establish that stance so everyone is speaking with one voice. All right, I think we're ready for the next slide. Okay, so now I want to delve into some of the issue areas, just kind of some highlights along the way, things that, were a priority either for the General Assembly or for LAC, for both. But I do want to caveat that this is really just a small slice of the work that LAC does. And in fact, I don't think that we've even got examples from every team, which if you are interested in, the full scale of the bill or full scope bills that the LAC has followed and advocated on, those bill lists are available on the legislative report page of the LWVCO website. So just want to make that caveat because there's a whole lot more going on than what I mentioned here. But by way of some highlights, I wanted to start with housing because housing has been a real priority issue for the state for several years now. Obviously, I think everyone is very well aware that housing affordability, just the lack of housing, and housing insecurity have been really big concerns throughout the state. Most communities in Colorado are experiencing a lot of challenges here. So the General Assembly, the governor's office, and by extension of that, our Legislative Action Committee and our housing team in particular has paid a lot of attention and done a lot of work in this area because it's something that the state has really tried to get a handle on and has been striving to find solutions to, beat back some of these problems that we've had in this area. So it's been a high profile issue for the last few sessions, and that strong focus has continued into this session too. The first bills that were introduced in each chamber, which is usually an indicator of a high priority amongst legislative leadership and that chamber, the first bills in each chamber this year dealt with housing. On the House side, it was House Bill 1001, which focused on housing development and qualifying property, which we'll get into in just a second here. And on the Senate side, it was Senate Bill 001, which focused on workforce housing and the housing tax credit. The housing development on qualifying property, that's a bill that's actually taken a couple of sessions to finally be successful. We have supported it along the way. And really what it's doing is looking to kind of streamline some requirements and facilitate the development of affordable housing on land that is owned by universities and schools, and basically kind of the idea of doing some infill in communities where housing can be co-located next to employment opportunities and transportation and childcare and just other services like that. So oftentimes you have to be really persistent when it comes to trying to get a particular policy through, and that was the case here. It took a couple of sessions to get that done, but it was successful this time around. Senate Bill 1 also passed and was focused on housing affordability and getting more housing available to support our local workforces. And again, if anyone from the teams as we go through this wants to chime in and fill things out a little more, or certainly correct anything that might need correcting, please jump in. And then I'll also say that other housing legislation that we saw quite a bit of, and that was also successful this session, were bills that were focused on homeless prevention supports and various protections for mobile home park residents. And with that, let's go on to the next slide. Oh, I think we skipped past healthcare, Kathy. There we go. Healthcare covered really a wide range of bills, but there were a couple that I wanted to highlight. One that, we've had our eyes on since before the session even started. And this bill deals with measures to improve Black maternal health equity. The impetus for this bill is basically racial disparities and just the concern that Black women in Colorado are twice as likely to die from pregnancy-related causes. They're 53% more likely to experience severe maternal morbidity compared to white women. And this is just unacceptable. So the bill is aiming to combat these disparities and look at ways that we can provide more community-led maternal supports. It's doing this in several different ways. Some of the strategies that are being implemented via this legislation is to improve or to include allowing for a statewide birthing parent survey, trying to get more information about needs and experience, codification of the Colorado Maternal Health Task Force, so the work of that body can continue, requirements related to physician continuing medical education, and requirements for health facilities to make available a statement of a birthing parent's rights. So this is legislation that we supported. Happy to report that this bill has passed. The other one that I want to flag, just because it's very timely and it's something that we felt very strongly supportive of, is a bill that was dealing with abortion medication access on college campuses. This bill also passed, and it is requiring that by August 1, 2027, that higher education institutions in the state operating a student health center, be they public or private institutions or a local district college, that they are required to provide access to abortion medication, with the exception of this provision potentially conflicting with the institution's religious beliefs. But if the institution has an on-site pharmacy, the medication must be available on campus. And, given the consideration of this issue and the provision of, abortion medication, at the national level, and this issue being a live issue in front of the Supreme Court, this is just another protection that we're pleased to see implemented at the state level in Colorado, so we can kind of insulate from some of the other stuff that is going on nationally. All right, let's move to education. Education is obviously a huge issue. It comprises costs associated for supporting public education in our state, comprise a huge chunk of the state budget. So there's always a lot to get our arms around. The team's got their work cut out for them. But I do want to mention just a couple of things. The School Finance Act is a bill that must be passed every year. And our team really dug into this and, did a great summary. For anyone that's interested in looking up the custom summary on our master bill list on the LWVCO website, there's a good breakdown and good overview. This is always a very long bill, so that summary is hugely helpful in kind of deciphering what's going on here. But one of the things I wanted to point out, in addition to the fact that this is critical legislation that has to be passed every year, and we supported the School Finance Act, but I did want to point out that maybe somewhat surprisingly, happy to report that funding remained pretty stable for education despite the overall budget shortfall that was happening in the state. And that's been a real priority, is to try and catch up the shortfall in education that has been basically historical at this point, going back so many years. There's been a lot of progress made in that regard over the last few sessions, so we're pleased that we didn't really see any backsliding there, and that the School Finance Act is ensuring that no district received less funding than when the new school finance formula was created a couple of years ago. So we're seeing that that progress at least be maintained. And in addition to that, the per pupil funding in Colorado increased by $440. So we do know that we still have a lot of ground to make up where public education funding is concerned in Colorado, but the situation could have been a lot worse given the budget situation that we were in this year. So I take this to be pretty good news. And then I also want to get back to Senate Bill 135. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This was the one referred measure that did pass this year, and it is seeking to provide additional funding for K through 12 education, because that's always a huge budgeting challenge, and we don't expect coming years to really be any easier. So, policymakers are always trying to get creative on how we can step up the funding and really kind of meet the need around this. So you're going to see this referred measure appear on the November ballot. It is seeking voter approval to raise the Tabor cap to fund K through 12 education. The practical implication for citizens is that if it's approved, taxpayers would forego a portion of their Tabor refunds. But again, an effort to see that we maintain some of the progress we've made on education funding. And I'll just pause there, because there are people that are much more expert in both the education and fiscal realm than I am. So I'll just pause to see if any of our legislative action committee members want to add anything. Maud, I see a hand.
If it's a really fat Tabor surplus year, if 135 passes and it's a really fat Tabor surplus year, after K-12 is taken care of, then additional money still under that higher Tabor cap could be used in the general fund for other uses. And having just over the last 2 years cut more than 15% out of the general fund, there are a lot of holes that could go help.
Right. Thank you for that additional point there, Maud, because it's a huge factor. So all right, let's move on to the next
Could
slide.
I just add something?
Oh, please do, Evie.
At the very last minute, they added something to Senate Bill 135. And I had somebody explain that to me today. So if there's more in the Tabor surplus than the bill says will be allotted for K-12, and if there's also enough to pay for the family affordability tax credit, if there's still money over that, it will go to improve the quality and access to early childhood.
Oh,
Mm, okay.
thanks.
Thanks, Evie.
But we don't think there will. But I mean, if we had a really huge Tabor surplus year, that could happen.
Okay, well, that's good to know. Thank you for that. Kathy Marr, please jump in.
Yeah, I think there's something I didn't understand properly. So the per pupil funding, is there something in that $440 figure that goes beyond the base funding? Per pupil base funding? Because I thought the increase was only on the order of like $200, 200.
Yes.
So does this 440 include some other increase
Yes.
that's not part of the base?
Yes, because House Bill 1448 from like last year or the year before had provisions to increase to make some changes to the factors and increase funding for at-risk kids, and that is being phased in.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, thanks for that clarification, Evie. Kathy Smith, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand how all this works, but Proposition 123, which was passed in 2022 for affordable housing, basically diverts around 3 million off the top for affordable housing off the revenue. So increasing the Tabor cap would make it so that this would not be diverted, or this is the first year that it hasn't been diverted. So they did divert it for the general fund, but if we're below the Tabor cap, then the money isn't necessarily diverted or can be rediverted to the general fund. So I'm just kind of wondering how all that plays with this.
Maud, I see you coming off mute, and if
Okay, yeah.
you don't mind jumping in, I think you'd be a far better person to answer that question.
Yeah, except if I remembered, did you say it was I'm not remembering exactly how 123 worked.
It was not a tax. It's basically
Yeah.
just a diversion from the state revenue, and somehow they debruce it in the diversion, sending it to the state affordable housing fund. So it's but because it's not a new tax, if we're below the Tabor cap, then they don't have to divert the funding.
Sure,
They can
sure.
use it in the general fund instead.
Yeah. So it was also taking stuff off the Tabor cap. It was taking money above the Tabor cap and sending it to housing. I don't think these two conflict. I don't, but I haven't been
No.
through the weeds.
They don't conflict because it didn't take the Tabor surplus money, it diverted money. That's what they meant by debrucing. It diverted money, so it wouldn't be calculated for the Tabor cap. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's the 123 money will go there whether or not there's a surplus, because I don't think it was surplus money. I think it was a particular part of taxes that automatically went into that fund.
When we're above the Tabor cap, and what happened this year is that they cut 130 million of the Prop 123 money because we're below the Tabor cap, and they can divert it to the general fund because we were below the Tabor cap. That's kind of how 123 got around being a tax was to allow this diversion when we're below the Tabor cap. Does that make sense?
You mean, well, it kind of sorta, that's sort of like a trigger that that money is not diverted to 123 if there isn't a Tabor surplus. But if we have enough money, like to meet the full Tabor cap, then the money would go into this fund. But I think we didn't meet the Tabor cap this year, the Ref C cap, whatever.
Right.
Odd, is that right?
You know what? I just made myself a note to go back and read the final version of 135 with the early childhood stuff and read 123. And I will send something to Andrea, who can send it to anyone who still cares.
That would be fantastic, Maud. And I mean, it's a good example of like how hard it is to create programming that requires funding and, make sure that you're not damaging something else and still balance the budget and, factor in how Tabor's going to play out. Like, I don't know, there's just so many pieces and it is such a complicated thing.
Yeah.
Whatever you can do to kind of sort us out, Maud, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it won't be this week, but
No problem. Thank you. I appreciate that discussion because it's such a complicated thing. Okay, well, let's go on to the next slide. On the topic of fiscal and revenue, I'll mention some of the kind of highlights, I guess you can say. Again, there's just so much going on. I'm not sure if highlights is even a fair word, but one thing that there was a bill package that was spearheaded by the Colorado Fiscal Institute, which for those of you that don't know, is a partner organization to LWVCO, and we cross-participate in each other's events and just a lot of communication and collaboration between the two organizations. So we were very interested in this tax package that they were putting together. We've had eyes on this since before the session started. And really kind of the impetus here was, making some tweaks to our state tax code to, kind of rebalance things and restore funding that, was negatively impacted in large part with the passage of HR 1, the federal big, beautiful bill. Is particularly for the family affordability tax credit. And, stakeholders in the community were really concerned about that tax credit because the FATC, as they refer to it, it's historically been one of the state's most important anti-poverty measures and has been effective in cutting child poverty, the child poverty rate by 20%. So there were really some efforts to try and figure out how funding could be restored to make that possible again. And so this 4-bill package focused on different things. And I will just say up front that 2 of the measures were postponed indefinitely, much to our disappointment. One was significantly amended, which, I don't think is necessarily seen as the best of news. And one passed. But to kind of give you just a brief overview, the first bill was looking to limit deductions for excessive executive compensation and operating losses to generate revenue for a new refundable child tax credit for families. The next bill was looking to decouple Colorado from the federal corporate tax breaks that were created via HR 1. These were the 2 that were postponed indefinitely. The third was looking to end sales tax exemptions on downloadable software to generate revenue for a new refundable child tax credit for families. And this is the one that was pretty heavily amended. And there's concern that the benefits there have been diminished. And then finally, the 4th bill focused on implementing technical updates to improve efficiency, That is supposed to say consistency, not constituency. I'll make a change there before we would distribute these, of Colorado's tax code, and that is the one that did pass. So, not the best of news there. But if we go to the next slide, and Maud, I do see your hand. I'll just mention this one thing real quick, and then I'll turn it back to you. We do have another strategy on the horizon that I want to make sure people know about. I do think many of you already do, and many of you are involved in the effort around Initiative 195. Which is looking to replace Colorado's flat income tax with a graduated income tax based on ability to pay. And it is believed that the revenue that could be generated here could come in at around 2 billion, maybe even upwards towards 3 billion, to support some of our most critical supports and services such as healthcare, childcare, and K through 12 education. We are a supporter of this initiative, and more than that, we are actively involved in the signature gathering process to ensure that 195 qualifies for the ballot in November. So while we didn't see great news overall at the legislature this session, we are hopeful that there's still some other strategies that can be implemented to improve the fiscal situation in the state. Maud, please jump in.
Yeah, the graduated income tax would probably cut the tax rate for everybody on this call. Probably 99% of LWVCO members. It's just folks at the very top that would see a higher tax bill. The Colorado Fiscal Institute bills were facing a veto threat from the governor, which is why they were either postponed indefinitely, or the one with the tax credit was heavily amended. So,
thanks for that information, Maud. All right, so let's continue with our advocacy efforts and signature gathering around 195, because that could be a bright spot in what was otherwise kind of a disappointing legislative session in this regard. Turning to natural resources, I guess I get risking sounding like a broken record, but so much that's covered. But the two I picked out are data centers. I wanted to highlight them because, this is really an emerging issue. There's not a lot of governance around data centers, but the issue is also not going away. So we've got to figure out how to deal with this. There's some benefits, obviously, in terms of, our economy and, technology, but data centers also come with a lot of impacts that can be harmful in terms of the environment. There's workforce considerations. There's significant impacts to the communities where they locate. So, our natural resources team was really focused on two bills that were coming at the issue in slightly different ways. They both focused on data center regulation, but one was providing tax incentives to companies, and our team's concern is that there were really inadequate environmental protections associated with the bill, voluntary compliance and that sort of thing. The other bill, well, and I will stop and say that bill was one that we opposed. The other was one that we did feel, even if it wasn't a perfect bill, we did feel that it provided really a foundational level of environmental and land use regulation to put some guardrails in place, and had a process for community input. And we just felt that, it was putting us on the right track. And, obviously as legislation, it was going to be, in addition to the Colorado statutes, which could be built upon in future years. So we were hopeful that this bill would pass. In this case, in the case of both these bills, they were postponed indefinitely. One of those we consider a win. The other one we consider pretty frustrating and concerning, because there are no guardrails now in place to govern the establishment of data centers. So, there's concern that these companies could come in and kind of take advantage of, the unregulated state that currently exists without full consideration of environmental impacts and some of the other things that need to be considered when data centers are located in communities. This is a really big issue. Again, not going to go away. We fully expect that it will be taken up again in the 2027 session, but just wanted to kind of get everybody up to speed for those who didn't follow this closely on kind of where we've been on this, and just flag that there's more work to come here. Let's go on to the next slide, which this is some of the work, some of the surveillance bills that we've got listed here. This is some of the work that took place within our JEDI team, and I'm going to turn it over to Kathy to kind of give you the overview here. Oh, and Kathy, you're on mute, so we are not hearing you.
I'm sorry I had to do that to take myself off of mute because my dog would be very happy to join the conversation. The surveillance bills were the biggest issue in the JEDI group this year. There were three. And one was the SAFE Act, which was Senate Bill 71, which restricted governmental entity. No, this is 70. Senate Bill 70, protecting everyone from excessive police surveillance. That bill restricts government entities' access to and retention of data identifying the historical locations of persons or vehicles. So what that is are the flock cameras. And unfortunately, this bill failed. But it would have protected people from basically warrantless searches about their location data as they go through the community, and also the retention of that data. The second bill is the SAFE Act, or the Surveillance, Accountability, and Freedom Ensured Act. And this bill would regulate the use of surveillance technology of all kinds by all law enforcement agencies. And that bill also failed. But this bill failed because of a threat of a governor veto. And the sponsors have said they're going to try to bring it back next year. So that's a positive. I think we all want to be sure to protect access to historical location data. And then House Bill 1037, the Fourth Amendment is Not for Sale Act. This made regulations on the sale, purchase, and sharing of personal data. It prohibited the government from purchasing personal data or from sharing the personal data that it purchased with any third party or with a government agency in exchange for anything of value. And this would include sharing with the federal government and also sharing with other state agencies. And then the third prong of this would prohibit the sharing or sale of personal data with another law enforcement agency or third party if the law enforcement agency was the one that collected the data. So these bills would have protected us from buying data from somebody else, including third parties, sharing it with a third party or another government agency. And if we collected data, we also couldn't share it or sell it. But unfortunately, all of these bills failed. And I think these bills are going to be really important in the coming years as technology gets even more able to analyze, collect, and monetize personal data. So that's the JEDI component. Are there any questions? Okay.
All right. Well, thank you, Kathy. Let's go on to transparency. And I'm going to hand this one over to Linda. As I mentioned earlier, our transparency work has been a big factor for LAC over the last few sessions, and it's definitely true this session as well. So I will let Linda talk about that a little bit more.
Okay, well, I'll just go back to the first slide. Andrea mentioned Senate Bill 107. It was a bill to modify the Colorado Open Records Act, or CORA. This is like the Energizer Bunny bill that we would just wish would go away, and it won't. This is the third year that we've followed this bill. And the first year it was killed in a committee hearing. The second year it did get to the governor's desk, but he vetoed it, and the sponsors were unable to override the veto. And this year it was actually killed in the first committee hearing, which surprised everybody. The bill, the reason we oppose the bill each year, it is the stated intention of the bill, the sponsors say, is not to curb transparency in government. It's to address Colorado Open Records Act abuse. But their solution catches up all records requesters so that everybody, whether you're an abuser or just a legitimate person wanting the people's records, it makes your records more expensive and you have to wait longer for the records. And each year we have told them when we testify that the best way to restore confidence in government and to end mis and disinformation and conspiracy theories is just to open up the government, be more transparent, don't close it up. So I guess I have to backtrack a little. Last year, the 2025 session, the League of Women Voters joined a coalition that we now call Team Transparency. It consists of transparency advocates such as the Colorado Freedom of Information Coalition, the Colorado Broadcasters Association, Colorado Press Association, Common Cause, ACLU, and the Independence Institute. And I really think that the reason this bill was PI'd in the first committee hearing, much to everybody's surprise, was because the legislators knew that transparency advocates were working together to stop this trend towards more closed government. We did try to Citizens Right to Know initiative. We tried to get that through the title board, but that was not accepted by two of the commissioners. So it's back to the drawing board, but we're not done. We're going to keep fighting these bills. I hope this one doesn't come back, but maybe fourth time's the charm. I don't know what they'll do.
Yeah, this is definitely one we were pleased that we felt like the message finally sunk in.
Yeah.
It seemed to, and the bill was surprisingly postponed indefinitely. So
Right.
great work by the team, and yeah, it'll continue.
Mhm.
All right, thank you, Linda. And let's go to our next to last slide, this last topic area, I believe. I just want to touch on one of the big bills that was considered by the elections and voting team. The elections cleanup bill, as it's sometimes referred to, is a bill that we typically see every year, maybe not quite every year, but usually comes around, it makes some modifications to the elections code, cleans some things up, sometimes, looks at ways that, we can continue to improve voter access and, election security, all that kind of thing. Knowing that we've got a great system in Colorado, but, tweaks can always be made to improve things or get feedback from how things are playing out on the ground to figure out like what changes need to be made to keep current. And that's kind of what we're seeing in the modification to elections. This was House Bill 1113. It did a whole bunch of things, but some of the things that I want to highlight that were important factors for us. It is requiring colleges and universities to provide students with election information, things like polling information, registration deadlines, and voting instructions before elections. And it's lowering the minimum age for student election judges from 16 to 15. We're excited about both those provisions because it's incorporating young people into the process and helping them become engaged citizens from a young age, which we know from research that if young people are engaged in the process at an early age, it's improves the odds that they will become lifelong consistent voters. So we're pleased with these provisions. It's also expanding voting access by extending the mail ballot delivery period by a week. It's requiring additional drop boxes and polling centers on campuses. It's lowering the threshold there, so it's getting them on to smaller institutions that may have been exempt in the past. And it's ensuring that polling centers remain open even during ballot shortages. And allowing workers to take paid leave to vote on any day that voting centers are open, not just election day itself. Importantly, it's also strengthening, protections regarding voter intimidation. It's prohibiting interference with a person's ability to vote anywhere or intimidating someone around, the process of them trying to carry out their vote. Anywhere within 100 feet of polling places and drop boxes, and it's explicitly providing protection for people that are delivering ballots for others within legal limits. And then with Tina Peters in the news right now, this last provision I think feels very timely. It's prohibiting someone from being a poll watcher if they have been convicted of an election-related crime. So also kind of looking at the election security piece there too. So that is a very quick overview of the election cleanup bill and kind of a highlight of some of the things that happened within the legislature and the work of the LAC this session. If you have questions about anything that we've discussed here and would like more information or would just like to discuss, please feel free to reach out to myself or Linda or Kathy. If you've got any questions about the LAC generally, we always love to talk about that with people because we're always looking for new members. And before you know it, the new session will be here. It starts on January 11th. So I think that's all. I know we're a little over on time, but if people want to stick around, if anyone's got questions, we would be happy to hear them and have some discussion. Okay, seeing none. Just remember, the offer always stands that if a question pops into your mind or if you want to talk about something, please just reach out to us. We're always happy to chat.
Andrea, you may have covered this and I missed it, but the differential payment through data surveillance bill, I understand went to the governor's desk, but it was looking like he wasn't going to sign it. Do you know anything about that?
I don't have a lot of insight into that and what is likely to happen there. I don't know if anybody else has got more up-to-date or behind-the-scenes information than me on that.
Are you talking about the surveillance data?
Yeah, the surveillance data, but specifically as it's used to do disparate pricing. Differential pricing, like if you go to the store and they know they charge you more because they know who you are because they have your data.
That's AI stuff. I don't know
Yeah,
about them.
I just thought,
thought that
I
that
heard it
did
went to
fail.
his desks, but that he was not, had not come across as interested in supporting it. So I just thought
Yeah.
I'd ask. Thanks. Great presentation.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, we participate in the Women's Lobby Legislative Committee, and there's a couple of us on the call that generally participate in that. And that was one of their big priority bills from the session. And I don't recall seeing anything from them about a possible veto, but I don't know. I'll keep my eyes out and see if I can round up any information. But that's interesting. I appreciate you sharing that, Cheryl. Any other thoughts or comments before we leave?
I just
All
want
right.
to thank you, all three of you, for doing such a wonderful job of summarizing this.
Oh, well, thank you, Cindy. Thank you for your work. And again, it's just the tip of the iceberg, but yeah, just a few highlights along the way. All right. Well, thank you all. We
I
really
just have one
appreciate
question.
joining.
I'm new to all this, so I'm trying to understand it. But I think it was Kathy who gave the summary of the four bills that didn't pass out of committee, and they were regarding privacy protection. What's the theme there? What's going on?
There was a lot of opposition from police agency, law enforcement agencies, and things like that. Um, I think, it has to be a balance between privacy and ease of criminal enforcement. And I think we just haven't reached that balance yet. Um, and unfortunately, I think it's going to be a real issue because technology is advancing so much faster than we can regulate things. I think that's the same thing with the data center bills. And for all of you that are in local leagues, I would tell you to please watch your county commissions and your city councils because right now there's no state regulation, and so they're 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 waiting in the wings to put these in place in communities. And once they start, it's hard to regulate them. So,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
mhm.
Thanks, Sue. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment a little further on that. I think precisely right, Kathy, and the we have protections in place. They have figured out the law and the balance for things like cellular telephone communications and where the protections are with that. There have been precedents set, some laws made across the country for those kinds of things. And right now, with these newer technologies, these companies are exploiting the fact that there are no regulations, there are no guardrails in place. And like Kathy was saying, they get a foothold using them, and then it's really hard to pare things back and put the restrictions in place. So I think it was really upsetting for us that those of us that were working on these bills this year, that we couldn't seem to get enough legislators on board with the fact that, these are civil liberties at stake. And I really liked what Senator Marchman had to say when they killed that 70. That, we Americans are very good at striking that balance between safety and our civil liberties. And we just need to get a little, exert a little muscle there to get the job done. So thanks very much, Kathy, for what you were doing on those this year.
Yeah, and I think that we also need more education about just how much they can do because I think it's astounding. Um, you know, um, and it's also how much they get wrong in the process. You see a lot of mistakes in AI, and those mistakes are being transferred into data sets that are being used for purposes that we never envisioned them before. So,
All right, Kate, please jump in.
Just an oddball comment from watching various pieces of legislation that I wasn't following for the housing team, but they were either before hearings, before something I was interested in, or after, or what have you. I was listening to legislation, a committee hearing for a bill sponsored by Sheila Leader having to do with driverless vehicles, autonomous vehicles in the trucking industry coming across the borders into Colorado, and they were trying to regulate some of that information, some of that behavior. And I think the bill was PI, but what was interesting is that she had specifically set it up to be a referendum and to be referred to the ballot. And when asked about that, she said that she did not want it crossing the governor's desk and risking a veto. So there was a lot of stratagem about that, and I think that continues to be why we're seeing more referendum from the legislature to the ballot, as well as, more issues coming up through citizens' initiatives and petition process. My 2 cents worth.
Thanks, Kate. Kathy, go ahead.
Yeah, to following along with that, the bill about the flock cameras that are around, that bill no, that's not the one. The one about buying and selling personal data. They had thought about trying to pass that as a ballot question, as a referred measure, but they decided the subject was too broad and confusing for the voters to be able to make the right decision. But apparently they were unable to make the right decision either. So it is a confusing subject. So
it's an interesting time we're living in with all the technology and the regulation around that's needing to develop very quickly and trying to figure out that balance. All right. Well, I think that is all for us tonight. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and for all the work that all of you do on behalf of LWBCO.
There's a question in the chat. So they would like to know when the slides would be available.
I'm going to fix the typo in them as soon as I disconnect. And Beth, if I share them with you, will that be, will that put it in motion?
Sufficient. Yep. Thanks, Andrea.
All right. So yes, soon on the slides. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.